Hello, folks. Welcome again to another exciting episode of Murder Hobo Inc. Iron DM Edition. For those who are tuning in for the first time, we are going to be discussing our collaborative world building project. But first, our plug for our sponsors. We appreciate each and every one of you for liking and subscribing, and B, our generous sponsors, Pirate Dog Dice and Oddfish Games. Proud purveyors of both Adventure Sense, a whole line of wonderful smelling little sachets that you can use to spice up your game, and the Shine system. So if you want to write better than Frank, you need to pick up a copy of the Shine system. So with that, and then also for our events coming down the pipeline, Thursday we have the Cred campaign, and then on Saturday we have Calamity. So make sure you pop that into your calendar if you haven't already. But that's a lot of words without introducing our human forms. Let us introduce our colorful cast for the evening. So I am Ian. I will be your moderator and host and all of that stuff. Not as entertaining as Frank or the others, but I'm what you got. Jeff, how about you? Who are you?
I am Jeff, and I have the two countries, Paradise and the great nation of Tar.
Fantastic. And John.
Yeah, my name is John, longtime role-playing freak, I guess. And I have the countries of Jubilor and Humany. One is good, one is not.
You take a guess which one is which. And then myself being Ian, I will be discussing the countries of Croaky and then the Scorned Isle. So to start our focus of the today is going to be geological oddities, as well as cultural artifacts, interesting things about your culture of your nation. So why don't we go ahead and let's start in the South. Why don't we talk a little bit about Paradise? If I can put you on the spot, Jeff. So you have an obvious desert area, but then you have interesting people. Which would you like to delve into first? Geography or culture?
Yeah, we're going to do geography. So, so this is a desert, sand. There's no rivers in Paradise, and we actually have right above Hollow is a very large lake, but this lake is the water's you can't drink it. It's very similar to the Dead Sea, where the salt content is extremely high. It's probably like got a high concentration of like 30% of minerals. So like you can't even swim in it. When you get in the water, it's like you just are float because there's so much stuff in the water as far as or the salt level.
Interesting.
So they call this so they call this the Sea of Tears, is what this body of water is. And it is rumored that underneath that there might be some ruins, but it's real hard because you can't like swim in there because it's so But that is the Sea of Tears, and then the Pathos up at the top, that lake above it or that area. I think we're decided that that's going to be freshwater. So it's basically going to get its water for the city from there. But Logos and Ethos, they have artisan wells, springs that are underneath the city that they use to be able to get water to the citizens. So that as far as geography, we got the hills. Also in the hills, there's gold that Ethos has mined. So they're quite rich of a city. And then they're also, we're not talking technology. So one of the things too is they do have oil, so they have an easy access to having light at night. So that is paradise.
That's fascinating. I'm curious about the Sea of Tears and how salient it is. Like when someone approaches this lake, for lack of better words, are there creatures that have like crystalline on the shore because they waded into the waters, or like salt elementals or any other feature, or is it just completely devoid of life?
I didn't think about that. I was thinking like in our time, our area, it would be devoid of life because there's nothing that could survive it. But in D&D, there could obviously, be a salt elemental. One of the things too is around that sea, um, it's like the shoreline's not like your nice beaches of Florida. I mean, it's like very hard to walk on, and the crystals are sharp and piercing. So you wouldn't be taking your date out for a luncheon at the beach.
Well, something that's kind of also paradoxical about that type of body of water is that might be one of the major sources of clean and easy accessible salts, which you need to survive your passages in the desert. So I'm curious to see if that might be something you explore in the future, is if there's going to be a salt mining industry as well, or maybe if there isn't, is there something that prevents people like toxic?
Well, there is. I forgot to mention that too. So basically, the minerals have healing properties as far as making your skin good, and so they actually do have people that are bottling that up, or putting it in barrels and shipping that around the world. It's supposed to reduce roughness, detoxification, improve circulation. And then also people that soak in there, though, they would probably maybe journey there because it is good for your skin. So you might have people that come to be able to just to lie in the water and help their skin tone.
All Surgeon General approved.
I like the fact that you have all these like horrible slavers, but who have like really nice exfoliated skin because they take their regular dips in the healing waters of the Sea of Tears.
Exactly. I mean, you got to look good if you're going to be selling people.
Here at Murder Ho Inc., we do not condone the selling of people. In fact, that's quite illegal and bad. Any other geological oddities or interests that you want to highlight before we transition and focus on other geographies?
No, there's some other things too, but I think when we start detailing the cities in the next month or so, I'll bring those up then.
Absolutely. I'd be curious more about those wells and the different politics of who guards and who controls those. That's got to be a pretty interesting source of political strife and power.
Hey, I got a question. The voice of
Yeah.
God. Can you describe the wall?
Oh yeah. So this wall would be reminiscent of like the Great Wall of China, or even like Hayden's Wall. I'm actually going to have it go all the way around the country. So this wall is, hang on, let me actually wrote this down.
You're going to actually spend the resources to build a wall around the desert?
Yes, they did.
Okay.
Slavery gets shit done.
Exactly.
That's a good point.
And this wall took, so when they first built the wall, it was just from Pathos to Logos. That's when and that took about 50 years to make this. And this wall is like, you can have 10 soldiers wide, at the top, be able to walk across it. So it's quite wide, and then tall. It's probably 20, 25 feet high. And so every mile there's a little guard station, and they also use that at the top of these guard towers. They have signals, flags, so they can basically relay messages between the different outposts to be able to relay messages between Logos and Pathos and Ethos. And so they made that one basically because they wanted to keep the Buffalo people out of their area.
And their children.
Well, the children they kind of would like to have in, but I was telling them earlier that Logos, their people decided that what is the Frank? The name of your I can't think. Estrians.
The treen.
Yeah, Treen. So basically, they're minotaurs, but they're more like water buffalo minotaurs. And Logos decided that they're kind of a delicacy, and they highly prize their children to eat. So, needless to say, that they didn't appreciate that and would attack them, obviously. Hence the need for the wall to protect themselves from themselves.
What is the wall made out of?
It's made out of bricks from the sand. So like sand, also clay from digging underneath, and they basically made bricks using the sun to make these bricks.
Well, that works.
So thinking about a wall that actually completely seals off your country here, what ramifications does it have ecologically? Like, do you have problems with your fauna? Do you have a genetic bottleneck or just no other real wild animals left because they've been hunted to extinction?
Well, early in time, so the name Paradise, I don't know if you recall, this used to be like a land of milk and honey. And whenever there was a big battle, like around the start of the time, our calendar year, and they defeated she was in Hollow, and they defeated her, and she supposedly cursed the land, and so it made this into a desert. So probably creatures that were living, that were used to having water and all this vegetation probably died off, in the hundreds of years being in the desert. So I'm sure there's some parts in there, but mostly the cities stay together, like the majority of the population are in the cities. So they'll trade for food. And then they've also used, like to grow plants, they've used hydroponics to be able to grow plants and have that, to help feed the citizens and the livestock.
Fascinating. All right. Well, thank you for going into such depth about your country. Any other parting thoughts?
No, not right now.
It seems like I'm having some mic issues. I might swap out here in just a second. Still cutting out?
Smidge every once in a while.
All right, that's what happens when you get one of the bargain items from Amazon. $30 headphones, maybe not worth it. So we will adjust on the fly, and if it keeps cutting out, I'll use my laptop audio. That's what you call resourceful hosting, audience.
Or sign language.
I wish I wish I could perform ASL. That would be fantastic.
Well, our stream does have subtitles on YouTube, so that's a plus.
Fascinating. All right. What about you, John? Would you like to focus in on Jubilar or Humany first?
Oh, let's go with a nice one. Let's go with Jubilar. All right, so Jubilar is primarily forested. It has large forests. This area, this foresty area in the, I don't know how to ping or draw or whatever, but the one near the city of Jubal, that part of the forest is known as the, I think I said it was Jubilation Forest or something like that. And it is kind of a lightish mood forest. I mean, it's kind of it doesn't feel like creepy or anything like that. But the forest changes to try to it's sort of like, I don't know if it's really sentient or it just has some kind of fey magic over it, but whatever it is, whenever non-elves are trying to go through it, it tries to kind of get them lost and turn around and heading back out. So most of them can't traverse the forest without an elven guide to take them, and that's the same thing for Jubal itself. It's protected by the forest, and the elves of Jubal protect the forest also, so they have a symbiotic relationship. And so the city itself is very difficult to find unless you're with elven guides, and that kind of helps as a defense system for the city. The swamp above there to the east, that is known as Pleasant Swamp, and it is very pleasant for the lizard folk who live in there. It's a lot of lizard folk who live in that swamp. In the long past, early in the history of Jubilor, the lizard folk and the elves formed an alliance to defeat Sahagin invaders. And Unity is the site where the treaty was signed, and that became a town there on the border between the swamps and the forests. And it's a big trading point now. There's lots of little rivers and streams that go through that pleasant swamp from various places, and so it's very wet. There's also, quite a bit of trees too. It is an actual swamp, not just a bog, so it's got a lot of foresty area inside there as well. I'll further to the east is the plains area, and they call it the flatlands, and that has lots of small farming communities kind of dotting the area. A lot of them will send their excess food over to the Lazy Divide in order to go for trade somewhere else. And then some of them will send their goods down to Amberway, which is along a river that comes out into the Wyvern Pass. I forgot the name of that river. I'm not sure I named it, but so Amberway is a city that has a stream or a river next to it that empties into the Wyvern Pass. And that foresty area that's near the Wyvern Pass there near the bottom, near Darkwood, that's known as the Shady Woods. And it is much different than the rest of the foresty areas in the sense that it has a very dark, foreboding mood. It's the trees seem to be hostile. It's got a lot of nasty monsters that live within there. And so it's a very dangerous place. And Darkwood itself is a kind of a dangerous town. It's along a little river there too. And it is a haven for smugglers and pirates and other ne'er-do-wells that have used that town. The governor that controls that town is corrupt. As long as he's getting his share of the profits of all this stuff, he doesn't really go into much for law and order. Then we have further over to the east, there's little hills there next to kind of like a little yellow square or whatever hex. That's known as the Crags. And the Crags have a lot of hill land, and it's rich with minerals. So there's mining those on there, but unfortunately, it's also a haven of a lot of different monsters that are pretty nasty. So, if you're able to protect yourself and keep your mining company safe, you can make a lot of money there. Otherwise, you're probably going to make a nice looking corpse for, the monsters, or maybe a meal. The the mountainous region there just to the east of that is with the trees, not that one. That's actually a volcanic mountain. That's a dormant volcano. But yeah, that is called the Oak Peaks, I think. Yeah, Oak Peaks. And they are mostly wooded mountains that kind of act as a border for the town of Mirthwall, which is there nestled in the coast there in between the mountains. And Mirthwall is a city-state that's independent of the rest of Jubilor politically, but it still has very similar wet values. And the main difference being it's not just a bunch of elves and lizard folk. It has just about every kind of species you can imagine living there. It's a very cosmopolitan type place. Very heavy in trade. They do a lot of trade with Kaizen across that bridge. They also send ships up and down Wyvern Pass and out into the sea. And so they're definitely the largest city of Jubilor and the biggest trading city. And that little Oak Point is where Oak Watch is. That little peninsula is called Oak Point, and Oak Watch is a fortress that the elves built out there to act as first they built a big lighthouse and a fortress around it, and that's sort of a first line of defense against invading fleets, and also an early warning sign for either storms or enemies or whatever might be coming from that direction. Up near Silverton, which is a fairly new up and coming town, there have been discovered recently lots of ruins and dungeons and tombs and everything from this ancient civilization that was in that area. And so adventurers flock there from all over the world. And now Silverton is kind of like a trading hub where they come to unload their loot and then go back into the dungeons or whatever. So it's become a very wealthy little trading town. And I have some details about the mayor and stuff there, but I won't get into it. But that's that area up that way is, lots of adventuring opportunities in that whole little area, northeastern side, I guess. And I think I covered everything. Does anybody have questions?
About these mountains around Silverton?
I didn't hear the very first part of that.
Still having mic problems there. I'll switch. Frank, you want to take over for 5 seconds?
Yeah, the Silverton. I assume those are Beltorian ruins kind of dungeons.
Yeah. So all that, I figured the ruins there that are marked are the main ones, right? But then I figured, all throughout those mountainous areas, there might be smaller, ruined areas just kind of throughout those whole mountains.
Now, is it named Silverton because there's an abundance of silver there? Because I've got the halfling land there to the north. I haven't done much with the Beltorian ruins, so I wasn't sure.
So it's called that because of all the silver that changes hands there.
Nice.
It's basically because of, it's a trading outpost and lots of silver comes in from the dungeons and gold and other stuff too, but mostly silver.
Any magic?
I'm sure magic items are there, for trade occasionally. Yeah, I would assume.
Cool. Jeff, you got any questions on that one?
I don't.
Ian, are you? Well, no, Ian's not back yet. So, one other question. You had mentioned swamps, and I don't have that noted. Are the swamps over here by Unity or
That
down
whole
south?
that isn't swamp area. I thought that whole area there in the light color green was swamplands.
Oh, these are
Grassland?
forest.
Oh,
Oh,
no, to the
Oh,
right, like
oh,
where the
there.
name Ju.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, those are grasslands. I can make them
okay.
swampland. That's not a problem.
Well, yeah, I assumed it was swamp. So yeah,
I,
that's
I,
where I got the whole idea of the lizard folk.
I can make it moors, like the Scorned Isle, or I can make it. Where the hell's my swamps? Uh, oh, up here in Asmana. I can make them just shitty swamps, or moors.
Is moors more like forested area that's
Yeah,
got a lot of
these
water?
these
Acidic
would be
soil.
moors. Yeah.
Yeah, let's go with moors.
Okay, I'll go ahead and crunch those out later. I'm a little bit behind, folks. My apologies. Ian, back to you.
Can you hear me?
Ish.
You know what? I have no idea. I've been in meetings all day, so it should be working.
Yeah, actually, that's good now.
You're
All
better.
right. Who knows? Basic default settings. All right. Yeah. So a moor has acidic soil, and it can have marshy spots to it, but it has a little bit of a different biome than if you did a something that's a little bit more swampy and more marshy. So it just depends what type of plant life and creatures you want. Moors are very scraggly, scrappy stuff.
This would be more like quite a bit of forested, but not dead, not so acidic because it can't get rid of the whatever the things, the living creatures that die, whatever. So it's not like a toxic. It's not very toxic, not very acidic. There are a lot of waterways that flow through it. I actually on my zoomed in map, you can see it's just basically got tons of waterways flowing through it, and so it moves water through there pretty quickly, but it is all basically wetlands.
Yep, then perhaps something a little bit more on the marshy swamp side would make more sense for what you've built there. So we can get those tiles swapped out, and by we I mean Frank.
Thanks for volunteering me.
Hey, I'm filling the host seat in full capacity. Mike or no Mike?
I think that was voluntoed.
Agreed.
Voluntold.
It's a swamp. Well, you have a very detailed overview there, so that's really fantastic. Sounds like there's a lot of adventuring there and plenty of areas to do a further deep dive into. My audio had cut out earlier. I didn't know if you'd heard that just to the west of Silverton, what those mountains are that are right there on the edge of the ocean. The side that is on your country, are there any unique features about that? Or is that just maybe just like a defense, natural defense for the ruins and the town there?
I assume there's probably ruins throughout it, but I don't really know. I mean, I didn't really think too much on it.
Well,
But
probably
yeah, you're
no
right,
one's
it's a
down in there
natural-
because of some horrible creatures, so it makes
Could be.
sense that they're unexplored.
Could be lots of monsters there. It's it's way out the tip of the wilderness, so I wouldn't think there'd be a lot of settlements there.
And previously, had you discussed, is the Beltorian ruins on in your country, or is that in the adjacent?
That's in the adjacent. Everything on
Okay.
the other side of the Lazy Divide is I think Shar or something. Can't remember that.
That is right. Any
Sharkari,
other-
home of the halflings.
Yeah, those are very short ruins. I'm joking.
Well, they are the Italian Renaissance halflings, though.
Oh, okay.
Any other questions or features that you want to highlight before we move? All right, so we can pop over to my region S, which would be the region of the croaky. So you can see that it's a quite dense jungle, and so much so that there hasn't been a lot of cartography done here yet. So hopefully more recent expeditions would get a better and more accurate map for people to look at. So for people who are unfamiliar with this region here, that's between the two boundary lines of the rivers, that these are frogkin. And a lot of the terrain here is quasi-mountainous, so you have a tropical mountainous region. A lot of the infrastructure for the civilization is within underground tunnels and caverns that have been naturally formed. The frog people themselves, the croaky, they are not miners, but these natural old lava tubes and naturally forming crevasses and spaces have led to a honeycombed civilization underneath the ground. In future maps, we'll look at unique features. So the elevation is not accurately displayed in here since we're looking at this from a two-dimensional model, but there will be a progressive slope downward till it meets the ocean, of higher mountainous regions to lower mountainous regions. And from that brings a lot of unique features since water that it collects here at the top of the mountain ridge and cascades down has a lot of way of shaping what the forest and topography is just from that natural downward sloping of the water. And part of a unique, this will get a little bit into cultural, but also into geographic as well, that there are large standing stones, almost like cairns / boulders, that were naturally formed and broke off at the top of that mountain range and roll themselves down towards the edge of the water. So these giant stones were actually given different names by the croaky and kind of venerated as mythopoetic figures, more in a mythological perspective, like the poet, the wanderer, the fool. And once they finish their cycle of reaching the bottom, they are laboriously transported back up to the top. So over time, they can progress their progression down towards the ocean. And with that represents different cycles in the frog people's lives, also is in tune to the natural rhythms of the earth, since there is still a little bit of underground volcanic and geoseismic activity happens. It gently coaxes those giant geomorphs down the slope. As far as other unique features, is that since this is tropical, it's still quite hot and humid. So as there are different valleys and sulcuses along this terrain, there is natural accumulation of fog and just like very thick, dense, warm pockets of mist. So at various times, there are even what seems to be like rivers of mist that flow downward at various times. That continuous moisture breeds a whole ecosystem of different types of fungi, of mosses, and of different other types of water-based like air plants. So there are some pretty unique features based on that. Down towards the more western sides, where it starts getting a little bit more of the flat region, is where you start having much more thickly dense forests, and kind of where it's a little bit more marshy and grassy. That's where you get a higher diversity of different plant life. The higher you go up, the more of a challenge it is, since you're dealing with higher altitude and you're dealing with a little bit more of a cooler, slightly drier climate the higher up you are going. Some of the different regions too that we'll look at is that even though that there is a riot of life, that there's also a creeping putrefaction that is sweeping through the land, more from the west side, but where there is these pockets of worm cult worshipping cultists that venerate an underground worm-like creature. And so there are these pockets of almost like festering boils where the earth itself is decaying and everything around it is turning into like pockets of diseased morass. So those are more in the lower lands and more lower elevation. The higher up you go, the more into the territory and higher sovereignty of the croaky people. Haven't really discussed too much with David what the areas of influence might be between the boundaries of the people of Croaky and his more mechanized elves, and what that might do to the geography there, if there might be any mining or if there might be any terraforming operations of some kind, especially where that river is flowing through his people's country. Question so far?
I got one. Who built the stone structures that rolled down the mountains?
That is debatable. They were naturally formed of some kind. Most of them, each one has its own kind of unique shape to it, vaguely round from all of the tumbling that it goes from the top to the bottom. There's a little bit of a theological debate if there was actually perhaps early frog people themselves that were turned to stone as some form of lesson to teach future generations, whether that is a transformation as part of like a punishment, or if that is part of just a hero myth cycle. It's up for debate. Some more secular of the croaky that sees more as myth and metaphor, as education, that we all have different cycles and lives that we need to live, and each person has their role. but they're kind of just cultural touchstones that people could literally touch, almost like living, moving poetry given form.
So not giants.
No,
Okay.
they're large, so I would say they would be a human to a human and a half's height of, I would say. The croaky themselves are more slightly diminutive figures, so these wouldn't be ginormous things, but it takes many years for them to reach from the top down to the bottom. Probably, I'd say at least a 50-year cycle, if not more.
Gotcha.
Do the croaky live in like large communities, or are they all like kind of spread out in smaller communities of like how many would be normally in a given community? And are there any cities that would go different from that?
So they're not really cities per se, but there are 4 major living colonies, or their choruses. So the people themselves are very much infused with song and myth and poetry. So their cities themselves, their communities, or I guess they call them chorus, which is actually a term, one of the many different terms for a group of frogs. It can also be an army of frogs. But there are 4 that I'll need to distribute on the map here, and a 5th one that was actually destroyed by worm cultists, and is kind of known as the cavern of the lost song, or one of the major colonies was completely eradicated. But they are sealed off cave systems, so they don't all interconnect, but they're spaced relatively evenly across the landmass. And each one has its own warren of different tunnels and rooms under, through the mountainside. They do have some rudimentary encampments on the surface, but generally they keep more underground where it is safe. It's closer to the earth, which they also quasi-venerate as kind of being a mythological mother-like figure, that you are in, almost like a ceramic toad. You are in the mother when you're in this kind of honeycombed underground cave system.
Or the croaky, are they actively hunting the worm cultists, or are they trying to live symbiotic, together? Or
So they had tended to be a peaceful people initially, and that's why when the first rise of the worm spawn and the worm cultists came into being, it was such a devastating attack, since they weren't naturally warriors by trade, and they had to learn that. So it is kind of a point of shame that they had to learn a lesson so painfully. But they do actively engage in skirmishes with the worm cultists. And there is a history cycle that I'll pull up here of how they've almost completely conquered the worm people at one point. But these worms are insidious and they keep coming back in cycles. And until the actual Chthonian worm itself, like the progenitor of all the worms, is destroyed, it'll always be a infestation in this land.
Very cool. I got one last question.
Fire.
All right, so do the people of Paradise prefer the croaky leg as a delicacy?
well, they do
Sorry.
taste like chicken.
Sorry, I had to go there.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Oh gosh.
I do actually have a quite detailed timeline. I pulled up my notes from the drive about the various cycles of battle between the worm cultists and the rebuilding of their civilization. And at some point we can go into that, but I literally have about 23 bullet points, because for basically any type of major movement, they have a lot of myth and song about it. So they have lots of detailed oral tradition. They could tell you about everything and sing your ear off.
Oh.
So with that, We will move to, so we've got 20 minutes left. So why don't we see if we can't do more geography of the other territories? Let's swing it back your ways, Jeff. And let us go to Tar.
All right, the great nation of Tar. So the predominant geographical features of Tar is mountains and hills. Almost all the land is hilly or mountains. So on the west, its border is basically the Silver Mountains. And so in the Silver Mountains, they have the two active volcanoes. To the north is Mount Firehead. And there has been a colony of giants that live up in those mountains that have come down twice and attacked the nation of Tar, but they haven't been seen in 100 years. And then to the south is the Heart Mountain or Sacred Heart Mountain. And basically the volcano got its name for, there's a big heart-shaped hole in the side of it to where when the volcano is active, it kind of makes it look like a glowing heart. And if lava flows, it makes it look like a bleeding heart. So that's kind of cool.
It's like a liberal. It's like a liberal volcano.
It is. And so down in that area are the goat tars, which is bottom half of it is a goat, top half is a dwarf. And so they have their community through their kind of caves, and they do mining in the mountains. And they also are above Rockport, which is one of the major ports of the nation. So they're kind of above it, but like other races are in Rockport that help with the trade of goods and services. And so in the middle of the nation are just hills, and in there's a town called Sanctuary. And in Sanctuary, that is basically a sanctuary. So anybody who goes to that town can declare sanctuary, and the town will protect it from whoever's trying to, kill them or harm them. So you have some people from humanity come there, for sanctuary. Now, one of the interesting features, it's not listed on here, but if you go up north and then this mountain forest region that's next to the Silver Mountains, there is what they call the Whispering Pond. And the exact location, they don't really, it's not really known, because if you don't have four legs, the pond will disappear. It'll just basically recede into the ground. And so, but if you're four-legged, some of them said that the pond whispers, like if they're injured or hurt, it'll whisper to them so they can kind of find it. And if they drink the water, they can get healed. Now, the Mutars, which are, bottom half cow and top half human, they actually use some of that water in their brewing process. Their famous ale called Moowizer.
Oh boy, are we at, I don't know, that's pretty close to, I don't know if they're gonna allow us to you better have a funky spelling.
So that although it doesn't give you any healing, it kind of leaves a tingling on your tongue, and people, whether it's if it's actual or not, but it's like an energy drink with alcohol. And then we have Harmony, which is another port. It has lots of different races in there. And then to the right of that, these mountains here, they're actually, there are what we call hare tors. So they're half rabbit or half hare and half gnome. And so these creatures viciously protect that forest from humanity when they're trying to log. So these creatures are very agile and stealthy. And so humanity has trouble trying to get, extract trees from that area because of them.
More about these hair tars. What half?
So the bottom half is a rabbit,
Okay,
and the top half is a gnome.
but do they have the ears? I'm just curious.
I'm sure, as far as genetics, some would, some wouldn't.
Okay.
Yeah, the ears they almost would have to, just because they would make them where they could hear better and
Who hurt
be
you
better.
growing up?
Well, I kind of got carried away with the centaurs, and I figured, there's got to be other creatures that are like that. And so it's not listed on this main map, but there's smaller rivers. So there's a river that goes from the mountains and kind of goes towards Jubilee and Harmony and out to the sea. And that's actually called the Misty River. And it got its name because through the forestous area, the river has a lot of mist and fog. And so the centaurs have used that, for their advantage on attacking or defending their lands. And then there's a smaller one that comes from the mountains near the Citadel of Eternal Wisdom and goes down towards Sanctuary. And Sanctuary, it ends in a huge lake that's the water's like really crystal clear in there. But since it goes through the mountains, that river has a lot of rapids and stuff. So it's, you have crazy adventurers that want to try, to swim the rapids and stuff. So as far as geography, that's the nation of Tar.
Fantastic. Any quick questions? Since we have one more, we have 13 minutes and we have 2 territories to get through. Any quick questions? All right, John, how about we touch base on your other land?
Right. So humany is almost all very fertile grasslands that are and plains that are kind of slightly hilly, but really great for farming. So there are a lot of farming communities. All these little marked towns, those are the bigger ones, but there's lots of little tiny like hamlets and whatnot throughout the whole area where there are little farming communities and roads that run around all across there too. That forest that there near Bastion, it's known as the Morningwood, Mourning, because they overforested it originally and nearly killed it off, and then lost a lot of it to fire as well. So they have only recently, well, I guess within the last 50 years or so, they've started replanting and practicing reforestation. So they're trying to build it back up. It's pretty sparse as far as forest goes, and they no longer, they've outlawed lumbering, or they've outlawed the lumber community for that particular forest. To the north of that, there's another little foresty area called Respite Forest or Respite Woods. Sorry. Respite Woods is kind of a hangout for a lot of rebels and there's a town in there called Freed. And it is a kind of for non-humans, it's just sort of like a sanctuary type city and to keep away from the humans. And so far they haven't gotten enough attention from, the church to send an army to wipe them out yet, but it's only a matter of time. There's that Brown River that comes down through the forest. Oh, sorry. The forest on the eastern side is called Pinewood Forest. And the reason it's called the Brown River is because it's so full of logs from the deforestation of Pinewood, that it's like literally like logs everywhere. So it's a lot of wood chips and also logs. So that gives it the color of brown. And so that is why it's called the Brown River. And a lot of those logs go down. There's several other towns along there. That Plowed is it's like a farming community, but there's several other towns along through there. And so that'll stop at the different ones for like building things and whatnot. The mountainous region up to the north near Norgard, that is, I had assumed, I didn't really know about the whole rabbit folk, so I had assumed that if it was really far north that it might have frost giants living there, and maybe some of those are there too, as well as the rabbit folk. Or we can change that; it doesn't really matter. But I had assumed that that fortress was built there as a northern defense against attackers from the north.
Rabbit frost giants.
Rabbit frost giants. That would be even cooler.
John, I'm just curious because I'm looking at like Westgard, Norgard, Seagard, Southgard. Is Trey good? Is it missing an R, or is that the actual spelling of it?
That's the right spelling. It's Traegud. They're not so specific on how they spell stuff. They're kind of lazy, and how Norgard would really be kind of Northgard, but they're too lazy to put the extra letters in. So
Good question. I was going to ask the same thing.
Or maybe that's just how they pronounce it.
it is pretty much how they pronounce it. So yeah, that's how they spell it too.
Maybe they were attacked by pirates
Could be.
because they took the R.
Arg.
You are not doing this show anymore, Ian.
Ooh, my one and done approach. I see.
So there's a river that's not on the map here that goes from Tower over near Sanctuary down into that lake called Loch Doom. And that lake is a very big fishing village community. And there's a river that comes out of that into the forest there and down kind of near the southern area of that area. But Loch Doom and Loch Doomed, the village, it's a big fishing area. The whole from there where it's Southgard and there's another town kind of halfway between Southgard and Rockport called Holloway because it's halfway down. That's a very dangerous trade route because that's full of monsters and and probably angry people from Tar. And so it's like one of the most dangerous trade routes within the whole continent. And but they will send trade down through there or back up from Rockport. So there's like a trail that goes through there. But Howway is basically this halfway point that's sort of like a rest stop. It's not much more than a bunch of inns and places like that. Some taverns.
Latrineville.
It's a Buc-ee's for humany.
Nice.
I think I've covered most of the geographical stuff. Let's go to Ian.
All right, so that would put you at Q, the Scorned Isle. So I'll put the geographical markers for the next time. Some of the interesting features that are going to be in the space would be where in the region between those two mountainous forest ones in the upper northeast. There's going to be, so that's that empty socket of where there's water there was where there was a larger volcano that erupted and sunk. And so the region to the south of that immediately, there is a interesting geological feature in that it's a slight sloped basin, just a little bit. But one of the defining features is that there is a plant that itself is relatively reddish or ruddy in color, but during certain times of the year, it erupts into really riotously bright red flowers. So some of the people that have done scouting or who have boated around this island or former shattered continent would describe it almost like as a sea of fire, but it's actually just these plants. So there hasn't been any type of like scientific investigation into any properties or something it holds, but it definitely reflects light. So it does look like it's almost actively on fire, especially when the wind blows through that region. Some of the other interesting geological features would be the regions immediately on the where this volcano was. I'll have to mark it out on a child map. Yeah, I'd say that to the south right. I'm just looking at your cursor, but like it's almost like a carnival game. Like stop there. So to the south of the topmost mountainous forest region, that region there, that all that forest is nothing but petrified trees. So it is the ghost forest since when the volcanic blast had really disrupted and shattered this continent, it blasted all the trees in the area. So there were just these stark, pale white trees. And since it was a very dense forest at one point, and it's now been completely petrified and there's no leaves, when the wind blows through this area, there is almost like a low moaning as the trees themselves either vibrate or have pockmark holes in them that make a whistling wail sound that goes through it. On the far west side, where we have the largest concentration of just pure forest, that whole area is sometimes known as just the Riot. And since it has a very large, explosive, diverse ecosystem there of all kinds of different plants, the rest of the island is relatively very scraggly, struggling plants since there is such a high concentration of ash that most of the area is moor-ish. But this west side is home to a secret coven of druids that is working to restore the whole island. So they've been experimenting and perfecting their plantomancy skills, and they eventually will conquer the whole island and restore it. So in these various areas, there are going to be unique like microclimes of various pockets of certain types of plants, some maybe perhaps getting close to sentience, and other interesting things. All right, so we've got 3 minutes here. There's a lot, it's not necessarily geological, but there's a lot of ruins in this main areas where there's moors. So shattered various cities and the basements themselves of various buildings, or if there were any lower levels, are filled with very acidic water. So it makes it dangerous to traverse the ruins because you may come across pockets of almost standing pretty acidic waters. These areas are also home to higher populations of the terrible ash zombies, or kind of revenants who lived in these cities before the cataclysm came for the island. Well, that puts us at 2 minutes at the end here, so we can do closing announcements or updates for the group. Do any of the four of us, with the fourth being Frank off in the choir loft somewhere, announcements for our audience?
Other than this is a work in progress, boys and girls. So these 8 DMs are doing a damn fine job. The only problem that we have is we all love this thing so much, we can talk for hours. And that's not what this show is based at. But make sure you catch the other 7 shows. They are on the YouTube archive, which you are presently watching, tinyurl.com/mhoboincarchive. Check them out. And if you don't want to see these money-making faces, check us out on the audio at Podbean, tinyurl.com/mhoboincarchive. See how this goes. That's it for my yammering.
Any other announcements from you, Jeff or John, or I can always make one?
Go for it.
Fantastic. Well, I do host a different podcast, which is Wandering Monster, where we live play up and coming RPGs every Wednesday from 8:30 to 10:30 Central Standard Time. So tomorrow we were playing a Warpland, which came out during the Plague Days, and needs another reshining. And then the week after that, we are doing Swamp, which is a large Morkborg supplement. And we'll have a special guest. We will have the drummer Harlan from the band Bog Wizard. So if you can't get enough swamps and wetland references that we made today, you'll have to check out Bog Wizard and players going through a swamp. So
how do we see that?
How do we see that? That is a good point. So you would go to www.twitch.tv/WanMonCast. That's WANMONCAST. You can also use that same handle to find us on Twitter and on Facebook. So Wandering Monster, if you want to get more of me and my mic not working. Yay. Well, that puts us at the hour. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Iron DM on Murderho Inc. Let us give our loving, adoring audience a kiss and a wave.
Transition.